My husband, Paul, who is 5 years younger than me, craves an unusual amount of attention and affection. If he's not the center of attention, he becomes moody and sulks. I didn't mind it so much in the early days of our relationship, but everything changed after our son was born. It seemed like Paul, instead of embracing fatherhood, became jealous of our newborn. One day, my patience snapped, and I packed my bags and left for my parents' house. I'm Chloe, a 35-year-old woman and a mother to a 2-year-old boy. Paul is 30 years old, and we got married 4 years ago when I was 31 and Paul was 26. I used to work as a driver for a local delivery company, a job I truly enjoyed. Growing up in a small town, getting a driver's license was a rite of passage, and I quickly found out that I loved driving more than I had imagined. So, after high school, I began working for a transport company. I started small, delivering packages with a mini truck, but I gradually aimed higher. I earned my CDL and began driving large trucks, gaining respect for my skills and strong physique, often being regarded as an equal to the men in the company. As the eldest sibling in a family of 4 with 3 younger brothers, I was always the dependable one. And while I wasn't the type to be seen as cute, I was known for my strength and reliability. Some men even said I had a motherly quality, but that wasn't a compliment I took well. Who wants to be called a mother figure by men who are older than them? The kind of men who assumed women should just listen and nod didn't sit well with me. I met Paul when he joined the transport company where I worked. He was fresh out of college and had left his first corporate job because of a toxic work environment. Paul was friendly, and our workplace was a decent one, so he fit in well. I remember how, during his welcome party at a nearby bar, he approached me with a friendly smile and said, "I heard you're one of the veteran drivers here, Chloe. That's really cool." Paul, though a bit younger, was sociable and easy to talk to. He wasn't particularly tall, just a little taller than me, and I clearly outweighed him. He wasn't what you would call traditionally handsome, but he had a clean-cut look that made him appealing. At the time, I didn't see him as anything more than a friendly colleague. He was the same age as my youngest brother, so romantic feelings didn't even cross my mind. One day, Paul surprised me by asking, "Do you have a boyfriend, Chloe?" "No, not right now," I responded, not thinking much of it. I had considered marriage once in my mid-20s, but the guy I was seeing turned out to be way too attached to his mom, and that was a deal-breaker for me. After that, I found dating to be a bit of a hassle. Many of the men who were interested in me seemed to be looking for someone to take care of them, like a mother figure, and I wasn't interested in that. "Can I be a candidate then?" Paul asked boldly. I was taken aback, but not offended. Still, I didn't want to be involved in office romance, and dating someone younger didn't seem like the best idea. "Paul, you're the same age as my little brother. It's hard to see you as anything but a kid." He grinned. "Then give me a chance to change your mind. If it doesn't work out, I'll let it go." It was hard to argue with his persistence. He wasn't bad company, and we started hanging out more, going on casual outings together. We visited zoos, amusement parks, watched baseball games, and spent time doing things we both enjoyed. Over time, my perspective shifted, and I found myself liking Paul in a way I hadn't expected. He wasn't my little brother anymore, and before I knew it, we were officially dating. Trying to keep the relationship quiet at work didn't last long. Paul wasn't exactly subtle, and soon enough, our colleagues figured it out. Tom, our supervisor at the time and someone who had always looked out for me, teased me one day, saying, "So Chloe likes younger guys, huh?" I rolled my eyes. "It's not like that. I just get along well with him," Tom chuckled. "Well, you're reliable. It's not surprising someone would want to stick around you." I had always been labeled as reliable, dependable, strong, the opposite of the typical feminine traits men seem to want. I had accepted it a long time ago. Paul, however, seemed to appreciate my strength. "Chloe, you're amazing. You're powerful and cool," he once told me. And while it wasn't the most flattering thing to say to a woman, I appreciated his sincerity. Paul proposed to me about a year after we started dating, and I didn't see any reason to say no. He was a good guy, and we got along well. When I met his family, his mother, Sandra, said something that stuck with me. "You seem like a very capable woman," she had said, her tone ambiguous. I wasn't sure if she was complimenting me or warning me about how spoiled Paul could be, but I decided to take it as a positive remark. Our wedding was a small affair, a simple party with friends and family at a rented restaurant. We didn't want anything extravagant, and for our honeymoon, we spent a few days at a luxury hotel nearby. It wasn't anything fancy, but it suited us. After we got married, life settled into a routine. Paul helped around the house, doing chores like cleaning, laundry, and shopping, but only when I asked him to. He had been used to his mother doing everything for him, so I wasn't surprised that he needed direction. Still, I appreciated that he at least did what I asked. What surprised me, though, was how much Paul craved attention. He wanted constant affection and would sulk if he didn't get it. I'm not someone who enjoys too much physical affection, so when I tried to pull away, even just a little, Paul would pout and get grumpy. If we were watching TV and I made an offhand comment about an actor being handsome, he'd start bad-mouthing the actor, clearly jealous. It was a little exhausting, but I tried to brush it off. Things got more complicated when I got pregnant. I kept it a secret for a while, unsure of how to handle the news. I wanted to keep working, but I also wanted a child, and I wasn't sure how I could balance both. The transportation industry wasn't the easiest place for women, especially mothers. There were very few female drivers, and it was tough to make it work with a child. When I was 5 months pregnant, I finally told Tom, my boss. "Congratulations," he said, "but don't push yourself too hard. If something happens, it won't just be your problem. The company will be accountable too." I had expected a bit of scolding, but Tom was supportive. He suggested I switch to internal duties for the remainder of my pregnancy, handling dispatch work instead of driving. The company was even considering setting up a daycare to encourage more female drivers, so it seemed like things were falling into place. That night, I told Paul about the pregnancy and my new work arrangement. I expected him to be happy, but instead, he was upset. "Why did you tell your boss before you told me?" he demanded. "Why did you decide everything without asking me? Do you think I'm unreliable?" I felt guilty. He was right. I should have told him first. But I had always been the type to handle things on my own, for better or worse. I apologized, and we moved on. But I could sense a shift in Paul. Despite Paul's reaction to the pregnancy, I continued working until just before I gave birth. The company had followed through with the daycare idea, setting up a small center right on site, which was a huge relief. I had always been eager to return to work, and this setup meant I could keep an eye on my child while staying close to my passion for driving. Everything seemed to be falling into place, but little did I know, things would soon take a turn for the worse. When our son, Leo, was born, I was overjoyed. However, Paul's reaction was strange. He didn't seem to share my excitement. He looked at Leo almost like a stranger and didn't make much effort to bond with him. At first, I brushed it off, thinking he just needed time to adjust to being a father. But it became clear that something deeper was going on. Paul was grumpy whenever I spent time caring for Leo, and I couldn't help but notice the hints of jealousy in his behavior. I'll never forget one particular moment. Leo had been crying, as babies do, and I picked him up to soothe him. Paul, sitting on the couch watching TV, sighed dramatically. "There you go again," he muttered. "The baby gets all the attention while I'm always ignored." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Paul, he's a baby. He needs attention," I said, trying to stay calm. "Yeah, well, it used to be me who got all the attention. Now the baby has taken over," he replied, a sour expression on his face. I was floored. I had heard of parents being a little jealous of the time and effort that went into raising a child, but I had never imagined my own husband would be this childish about it. It didn't end there. When I was breastfeeding Leo one night, Paul actually said, "Great, now the baby's taken over what used to be mine." I didn't even know how to respond. It wasn't just the immaturity of the comment that shocked me. It was the realization that Paul was seriously jealous of his own son. I couldn't comprehend it. How could he possibly be upset about not being the center of attention when we had a newborn to take care of? As Leo grew older, Paul's jealousy didn't fade. In fact, it seemed to get worse. He barely helped with the baby, and when he did, it was with a begrudging attitude. If I asked him to feed or change Leo, he would sigh heavily and do it half-heartedly, clearly annoyed that he had to share my attention. It was exhausting trying to manage everything on my own, and I began to feel more isolated in my own marriage. Whenever we visited my family, it was a relief. My parents and brothers adored Leo, showering him with love and affection. My brothers, all fathers themselves, understood how tough it was raising a baby, but they were supportive and always willing to lend a hand. Paul, on the other hand, withdrew more and more whenever we were around my family. He didn't seem to enjoy being there, and I noticed that he would get quiet and moody if Leo was getting attention from everyone. One day, my oldest brother David commented, "Leo looks just like you, Chloe. He's got your eyes and your determination, I can tell." Hearing that made me smile, but I could sense Paul bristling beside me. He didn't say anything, but his silence spoke volumes. I knew he was feeling left out again, but what could I do? It wasn't like I could ignore our son just to make Paul feel better. Life at my parents' house was lively. My 3 brothers lived with their wives and kids in a big, bustling household. There was always noise, always someone around, and plenty of hands to help take care of the kids. It was chaotic, but in a good way. The kids, ranging in age from 3 to 10, ran around playing together, and Leo fit right in, even at such a young age. Being at my parents' house felt like a refuge from the tension at home. Back at home with Paul, though things were becoming unbearable. One evening, as I was feeding Leo his dinner and Paul sat across from us, sulking as usual, he blurted out, "I want a new wife, someone younger than you." At first, I thought he was joking. It sounded so absurd. But when I looked at him, I saw that he wasn't joking at all. He was dead serious. "What?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You heard me. I want to remarry. I'll find a younger woman who'll give me attention," he said, crossing his arms like a petulant child. Something in me snapped. I had been patient with Paul for months, putting up with his jealousy and his immature behavior, but this was too much. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "Go ahead, find yourself a young woman. Let's see how well that works out for you." Paul blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting my response. "Wait, Chloe, You were just what? Trying to hurt me? Trying to make me feel bad?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "If you think I'll just sit here and take this, you're wrong. I'm done, Paul." I had never been one to get angry easily, but Paul had pushed me too far. I was tired of being the only adult in the relationship, tired of dealing with his childish demands. I packed up a few things for myself and Leo, and within an hour, I was out the door, heading back to my parents' house. When I arrived, my mom took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Chloe, what happened?" I told her everything. Paul's jealousy, his lack of interest in being a father, and finally, his ridiculous demand for a new, younger wife. My brothers and their wives chimed in, all offering their support. "It's tough being a new parent," David said, "but that's no excuse for him to act like a spoiled brat." My sisters-in-law agreed. "You deserve better, Chloe. If he can't handle being a father, that's his problem, not yours." For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. Being back at my parents' house, surrounded by family, made me realize that I wasn't alone. I could handle this, even if it meant raising Leo on my own. My family had always been there for me, and now, more than ever, I needed their support. I didn't know what Paul would do next, but for now, I was staying with my family. I wasn't going to tolerate his behavior any longer. As far as I was concerned, Paul needed to grow up and take responsibility, or we were done for good. As the days went on, I focused on Leo and my work. I went back to driving part-time, with my mom and sisters-in-law helping with childcare. Paul and I still worked for the same company, so there was no avoiding him completely, but I kept my distance. I avoided him at the office, and when I did see him, I made it clear that I wasn't ready to talk. A couple of weeks after I had left, my boss, Tom, called me into his office. "Chloe, is everything okay with you and Paul? He's been making a lot of mistakes lately, and we've had complaints from customers." I sighed. Of course, Paul's personal issues were spilling over into work. "We're having some problems," I admitted. "I'll talk to him." Tom nodded. "Just try to keep it professional, okay? We can't have this affecting the company." I agreed, Though I wasn't thrilled about having to talk to Paul. He was obviously struggling, but that wasn't my problem anymore. Still, I didn't want him to lose his job, so I knew I had to confront him. Later that day, I caught Paul just as he was about to leave the office. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Paul turned around, his eyes widening in surprise. "Chloe, you're actually talking to me?" He looked awful, thinner, pale, and with dark circles under his eyes. He had clearly been struggling since I left. "Yes, we need to talk," I repeated. "You're making mistakes at work, and Tom's noticed. You can't let personal stuff affect your job." Paul looked down, shame flickering across his face. "I know. I've been a mess since you left. I don't know how to handle it." His words softened me a little, but I wasn't ready to forgive him just yet. "Look, Paul, if you want to fix things, you need to start acting like an adult. Take responsibility for your actions, both at work and at home." Paul nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'll try, Chloe. I swear, I'll try. I need you." I didn't say anything more. Instead, I turned and walked away, leaving Paul standing there. I wasn't ready to make any decisions just yet, but I knew one thing for sure. If Paul didn't change, there was no future for us. As the weeks passed, I started to see Paul making an effort at work, but I wasn't sure if it was too little too late. I had distanced myself emotionally and mentally from him, and my focus had shifted entirely to Leo and my family. Yet I couldn't ignore the slight improvement in his attitude and behavior. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but it seemed like he was trying. One day, my boss Tom pulled me aside. "Chloe, I've noticed that Paul's been more focused lately. He's not making the same mistakes as before. It seems like he's finally getting back on track." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to make of the changes I was seeing. Part of me was glad that Paul was pulling himself together, but another part of me remained skeptical. Would this last? Or was it just a temporary fix to avoid losing his job? I wasn't ready to let my guard down yet. Back at my parents' house, life continued to be busy and chaotic, but in a good way. My brothers were always around, helping out with Leo, and my sisters-in-law were a constant source of support. I felt at peace being there, surrounded by family, and it made me wonder if I even wanted to return to my old life with Paul. It wasn't long before Paul made his first real move to try and reconcile. One Sunday afternoon, as I was preparing dinner with my mom, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and found Paul standing there with a strange expression on his face, but what caught my attention immediately was his appearance. His head was completely shaved. "Paul?" I asked, my voice tinged with confusion. "What happened to your hair?" Paul rubbed the back of his head awkwardly, clearly embarrassed. "I was trying to figure out how to show you I'm really sorry. This was all I could think of. I wanted to show you I'm serious about changing." I couldn't help but let out a small laugh, though it wasn't out of ridicule. His shaved head made him look so different, and not in a way that suited him. But I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I saw that he was genuinely trying. Before I could respond, Leo, who had just started to speak a few words, looked up at Paul from where he was playing on the floor. He pointed at Paul and said, "Dad?" Paul's eyes widened in disbelief. Did he just call me Dad?" I nodded, unable to hold back the tears that had been welling up. "Yeah, Paul, he did. Even if you haven't been around much, he still knows you're his father." Paul crouched down and picked Leo up, holding him tightly as if he never wanted to let go. "I'm sorry, Chloe," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry for everything. I've been a terrible father and husband. I don't know what I was thinking. Please, will you come back?" I stood there for a moment, watching Paul hold Leo. It was the sight I had been longing for, Paul finally stepping up as a father. I had to admit it tugged at my heart in a way I hadn't expected, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down just yet. "Are you really someone I can rely on now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to show him how emotional I was. Paul hesitated, then said, "Maybe not yet, but I want to be. I want to prove to you that I can be the husband and father you deserve." His sincerity was clear, but I knew that action spoke louder than words. "All right," I said slowly. "I'll consider coming back, but I have one condition." Paul's face lit up with hope. Anything. I'll do anything. I want you to move in here with me, I said, gesturing around my parents' house. You'll live here with me, Leo, and my family. The color drained from Paul's face as he looked around at the bustling house filled with my brothers, their wives, and all their kids. It was far from the quiet, comfortable life he was used to as an only child. I could tell that he was intimidated by the idea of living in such a lively and crowded household. Here? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. With everyone? Yes, I replied firmly. If you're serious about being a father and husband, you'll move in here. My family is here to help, and it's the best environment for Leo right now. You'll need to get used to being around other people and not being the center of attention all the time. Paul looked conflicted, but after a long pause, he nodded slowly. Okay, if that's what it takes to prove myself, I'll do it. I didn't expect him to agree so easily, but I was relieved. Moving in with my family would be a huge adjustment for Paul, but it was necessary if we were going to make this work. Good, I said, wiping away the last of my tears. We'll see how it goes. Paul moved in the following week. At first, he looked lost. My family's house was a whirlwind of activity, with kids running around, adults chatting, and noise constantly filling the air. Paul, who was used to being spoiled and coddled, had to adapt quickly. There was no room in this house for babying an adult man. My brothers weren't the type to tiptoe around anyone, and my sisters-in-law were even more direct. The first time Leo cried while Paul was around, my sister-in-law Tina didn't hesitate. Paul, the baby's crying, go change his diaper. Paul looked bewildered. What, me? You're the father, aren't you? Go do it, Tina said, giving him a stern look. Paul hesitated for a moment, but eventually followed her instructions. Slowly but surely, he started stepping up. My sisters-in-law made sure he didn't slack off, and my brothers, who weren't shy about giving advice, offered their help when Paul needed guidance on how to handle fatherhood. Over time, Paul's discomfort faded, and I began to see a real change in him. He started spending more time with Leo, playing with him, feeding him, and even taking over diaper duty without being asked. The more Paul was involved, the more his attitude shifted. It was as if he was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be part of a family. For the first time, I saw him interacting with Leo like a real father. Wow, it's like I suddenly have 6 brothers, Paul joked one evening as he sat at the dinner table with my family. I couldn't help but smile. That's what happens when you marry into this family. You've got to keep up. Living in such a big, busy household had a positive effect on Paul. He no longer seemed lonely or lost, even though there were always kids running around. He had found his place in the chaos. There was always someone to talk to, someone to share a drink with, and always a helping hand when he needed it. As Paul settled into this new way of life, I found myself feeling more at ease too. The tension that had hung over our relationship began to lift, and I started to see a future where we could truly rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't perfect, and I still had my reservations, but I couldn't deny that Paul was making an effort, and that effort was making a difference. One evening, as we were getting ready for bed, Paul turned to me and said, "You've been looking really beautiful lately, Chloe. You've always been beautiful, but I don't know, it's like you've got this glow." His compliment caught me off guard. I hadn't noticed much of a change in myself, but it felt good to hear. "Thanks, Paul," I said softly. "I guess I've just been feeling more like myself lately." "You deserve to feel good," he said, reaching out to hold my hand. "I'm really sorry for everything I put you through." I looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "I appreciate that, Paul. I really do. But actions speak louder than words. I want to see how you continue to handle things." He nodded. "I understand. I'll keep trying, Chloe. I'll prove to you that I can be the husband and father you deserve." For the first time in a long time, I believed him. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, I felt like we were on the right path. And maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Months passed, and the more time went by, the more I saw Paul transform. Living with my family had forced him to grow up in ways I never imagined he could. There was no room for selfishness or childish behavior in a house full of kids and adults who didn't tolerate nonsense. Paul quickly learned that if he wanted to be part of this family, he needed to pull his weight, and he did. I started to see glimpses of the man I fell in love with, the easygoing, friendly Paul who had once charmed me with his persistence and determination. He wasn't perfect, but he was making an honest effort to be a better father to Leo and a better husband to me. It was as if moving in with my family had reshaped his perspective on what it meant to be a parent. One afternoon, I watched from the living room as Paul played with Leo in the backyard. The two of them were laughing and running around, and my heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. Paul had finally stepped up, and seeing him bond with our son like that brought tears to my eyes. I hadn't realized just how much I had longed for this, for Paul to truly be present, not just physically but emotionally as well. My sisters-in-law noticed the change too. Tina, who had been the strictest with Paul when he first moved in, pulled me aside one day. "You know, Chloe, I didn't think he had it in him, but Paul's really surprised me. He's doing a good job with Leo." I smiled, feeling a sense of validation. "I know. I wasn't sure if this would work, but I'm glad I gave him the chance." Tina nodded approvingly. "It's not easy to change, especially for someone who's been used to being spoiled. But I think he's finally realizing what it means to be a husband and father. You two might just make it." Her words stuck with me, and I began to let down the walls I had built between Paul and myself. Slowly, but surely, we started spending more time together as a family. We took Leo on outings to the park, played with him at home, and even went out to dinner a few times, just the three of us. Each little moment felt like a step toward healing, a step toward rebuilding the foundation we had once lost. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Paul turned to me and said something that caught me off guard. "Chloe, I want to talk about something serious." I raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, looking more thoughtful than I'd ever seen him. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about how far we've come since you left, and, well, I want us to try for another baby." I was stunned. This was the same man who, not too long ago, couldn't even handle being a father to one child. Now he was talking about expanding our family. I wasn't sure how to respond at first. "Paul, are you sure? You know how hard it was the first time around." He nodded, his expression serious. "I know, and I wasn't the best father or husband, but I'm different now, Chloe. I've learned a lot, and I want to give Leo a sibling. I want to grow our family." I thought about it for a moment, my heart racing. The idea of having another child had crossed my mind before, but I hadn't considered it seriously. Not until now. "I don't know, Paul," I said honestly. "Things are going well right now, but it hasn't been that long since we started rebuilding." "I don't want to rush into anything." He nodded, understanding. "I get that. I just wanted you to know that I'm open to it when you're ready. I love you, Chloe, and I want to keep moving forward with you." Hearing him say that melted away the last bit of hesitation I had been holding on to. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I love you too, Paul. Let's take it one step at a time." From that moment on, our relationship continued to strengthen. We worked together as a team, supporting each other through the challenges of parenthood and marriage. Paul wasn't perfect, no one is, but he was trying, and that was what mattered most. I could finally see a future for us again, a future where we could be happy as a family. A few months later, I found out I was pregnant again. This time, the news filled me with joy instead of uncertainty. Paul's reaction was entirely different from the first time. He was over the moon, excited to welcome another child into our lives. "Boy or girl, it doesn't matter," he said, grinning from ear to ear. "I'm just happy we're expanding our family." Our second pregnancy brought us even closer. Paul was more involved, more supportive, and more attentive than he had ever been. He attended every doctor's appointment with me, helped with everything around the house, and made sure I didn't feel overwhelmed. He had grown into the man I always knew he could be. When our daughter Lily was born, Paul was right there by my side, holding my hand and crying tears of joy as she took her first breath. The moment she was placed in his arms, I saw a transformation in him. He was a father, through and through. Life with two children was busier than ever, but it was also more rewarding. Paul and I navigated the challenges of parenthood together, and our bond as a couple grew stronger every day. We still lived with my family for a while longer, but eventually we moved back into our own home, feeling confident in our ability to manage on our own. Looking back on everything we had been through, I realized how far we had come. There had been moments when I thought our marriage was beyond repair, moments when I thought I would be raising Leo on my own, but Paul had proven me wrong. He had shown me that people can change if they're willing to put in the effort, and he had worked hard to rebuild the trust he had lost. One evening, as we were tucking Leo and Lily into bed, Paul turned to me with a smile. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" I nodded, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "Yeah, we really have." "I'm glad you didn't give up on me," he said softly, pulling me into a hug. "I'm glad you didn't give up on us either," I replied, resting my head against his chest. As we stood there, holding each other in the quiet of our home, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. We had fought for our family, and in the end, we had won. And that, more than anything, was the most important thing.